Hello lovely students, welcome to this lesson. The topic for today is Ancient Greek Sport Festival. In the ancient Greece, several festivals took place, and these festivals are usually religious in nature. But even some of these religious festivals features sporting events. And those that particularly feature sports are many, but there are 4 major sport festivals in ancient Greece. These festivals are held at specific intervals, and they provide avenue for athletes across the nation to compete for a prize. These ancient Greek sport festivals featured athletics, games, music, and dance. Like I said, they are particularly religious in nature, but they also feature sporting events. And some of the important festivals that feature sporting events include Olympics. Olympic, which is one of the biggest ancient sport festivals, was held in the temple of Zeus, the ancient Greek god. These sport festivals are referred to as Hellenic Games, and they also include the Parthian Games. Parthian Games were held in Delphi in honor of another Greek god known as Apollo. This is the Delphi Stadium, and the games are held in honor of Apollo, another Greek god. Like I said earlier on, these festivals are religious in nature. The Isthmian Games. The Isthmian Game is another game, and the Isthmian Game were held in Corinth. These games also feature sporting events, and they were held in honor of Poseidon, another Greek god. The Nemea Game. The Nemea Game, they were held in Nemea, and they are held in honor of Zeus. The Nemea Game is held in this stadium. This video by Digital Diogenes provides details of the lesson, so enjoy.
The Greeks had a concept called Arate, or excellence. They believed that practicing and becoming excellent in many areas of life was good for you. It was good for your city, and it pleased the gods. So how did the Greeks develop Arate? The central place for developing Arate in Greek society was the gymnasium. A Greek gymnasium would be familiar in some ways to modern observers. It was a place to develop strength and fitness. There was a stadium for gymnastics and running, and a palestra for wrestling and boxing. It also had ornate showers for hygiene. But the gymnasium was much more than a modern gym, and modern observers would be struck by many differences. Firstly, there were no women. The gymnasium was strictly for men and boys. Secondly, and perhaps most strikingly, there would be much less clothing than you'd see at a modern gym. Almost all Greek sports were done in the nude. Like the gods they looked up to, the Greeks strived for the perfect body and loved to display their fitness and physique as a measure of arete. In fact, the Greek word for naked was gymnos, and it's from here that we derive the word gymnasium and gymnastics. The biggest difference, though, was the ancient gymnasium was aimed at training both the body and the mind. There was structured gymnastic training and ball sport for boys. Young men took part in more military-themed training like javelin, wrestling and boxing. Past this, the gymnasium was also a centre for socialising and learning, where men of all ages went to talk, argue, and where older men would train younger men in mathematics, literature, rhetoric and philosophy. The Greeks believed developing excellence could best be achieved through competition. They competed on poetry, plays, music, and for the best arguments. But the major arena for competition was the games. What were the games? The games were festivals held throughout the Greek world where Greek-speaking men took part in athletic competitions. The most famous of these festivals was the Olympic Games, which were held at Olympia. These were so prestigious and so central to Greek life that they measured time around them. Most Greek history is measured from 776 BCE, the year of the first Olympic Games, and from then on, the Games were held every 4 years. Each 4-year cycle became known as an Olympiad. The Olympics weren't the only games. As well as many smaller competitions held within city-states or regions, there were a number of important pan-Hellenic games held throughout the Olympiad. The Pythian Games were held at Delphi on the second year of every Olympiad. The Isthmian Games were held every 2 years near Corinth. The Nemean Games were held every 2 years at Nemea. The games didn't have gold, silver or bronze medals like the modern Olympics. Instead, only the winner was awarded, and they received ribbons and a wreath as a symbol of their arate. At the Olympic Games, it was an olive wreath. Pythian Games, laurel. Isthmian Games, pine. And Nemean Games, wild celery. The Greeks were almost constantly in a state of war with each other, but the games were so important that in the months leading up to them they held a truce. This allowed athletes to prepare and to travel to the games safely. A violation of this truce could get your athletes barred from competition. Having an athlete from your city win an event was a big deal. Individual athletes won honours and wreaths, and the polis shared in that glory so much that they would show their appreciation by giving winning athletes preferential treatment, valuable goods like olive oil, and free meals for life. So when Apollos had its athletes banned for breaking the truce, as Sparta did in 420 BCE, this was a serious blow to its prestige and morale. So what sports were included in the games? The first ever Olympic Games was held with only a single competition, a running race over 185 metres. This distance was known to the Greeks as a stade, which is where we get the word stadium, and the event gets its name from too. False starts in the stadium didn't get you disqualified, they got you publicly beaten and shamed in front of the crowd. Coroebus of Elis, the first winner of the sprint in 776 BCE, was a household name even hundreds of years after his death. Over the years, more sports were added to the games. A 2-stage race, a 20-stage race, and many others, some similar to modern sports and others very different. Like the hoplite race, in which competitors would run 1.6 kilometres or a mile in full armour and with a shield, often being forced to leap over fallen competitors. There was wrestling, in which the contestants would cover themselves in olive oil, and the aim was to pin your opponent to the ground. Milo of Croton in southern Italy was famous for his skill in wrestling and dominated the competition for nearly 25 years. His strength and size made him a celebrity. He was said to have built his strength from childhood by carrying a calf. By the time he was fully grown, he could apparently lift a fully grown ox. Another story says that he could hold fruit in his hand without damaging it, while challengers tried to prise open his grip, unsuccessfully. His appetite was huge, and he commanded so much respect that wrestling competitors even surrendered before starting. He's also said to have died trying to test his strength. He attempted to split a tree trunk with his bare hands. The trunk sprang back unexpectedly, trapping his hands. As night fell, the defenceless Milo was set upon by a pack of wolves, a horrific, undeniably memorable way to die. Another Olympic event was the pentathlon, which was itself made up of the sprint, wrestling, and 3 other sports. The discus throw, which inspired one of the most famous Greek statues, the Discobulus. The javelin throw, which imitated a typical military skill, although with a lighter javelin. And the long jump, which unlike modern long jump, probably consisted of 5 successive jumps, with weights to help balance the jumper. The philosopher Aristotle thought the well-rounded athletes of the pentathlon were the peak of physical fitness and beauty. A body capable of enduring all efforts, either of the race course or of bodily strength. This is why the athletes in the pentathlon are most beautiful. Boxing was a brutal affair. Contestants would wrap their fists in leather straps and without rings, gloves or timed rounds would battle unto knockout. Later Olympics saw the addition of wooden or metal studs to the leather straps. Eurydamus of Cyrene, a famous boxing competitor, had all of his front teeth knocked out or broken. Rather than spit them out and show weakness, he swallowed them all. Oh, he went on to win the fight too. The pancratium was similar to mixed martial arts or UFC, except with fewer rules. In fact, the only real rules were no eye gouging or biting, which would be punished by referees who would beat the offender with a stick. One competitor, Sostratus of Sicyon, dominated the games for over 12 years with the technique of deliberately breaking his opponent's fingers, leading to the nickname Mr. Fingertips. Competition in the pancratium went on until submission, which an athlete could signal by raising a single finger, which was probably pretty difficult if you'd been fighting against Mr. Fingertips. The most spectacular and glamorous sport, though, were the chariot races. 2 or 4 horse charioteers would race around a tight course. These light chariots were hard to control, and there was an ever-present danger of head-on collisions, draggings and death. Whilst the charioteers, who were usually slaves, were brave, then, as now, most of the glory went to the trainers who bred the horses and trained the teams. This was an expensive business, and was often dominated by aristocrats wanting to gain the approval of their polis. One aristocrat, Alcibiades, entered 7 chariots in one race, gaining a victory which he used for political advantage at home in Athens. Like in the gymnasium, women weren't allowed to compete in the Olympics. Unmarried women, however, were allowed to attend the festival, and they were even allowed to enter teams in the chariot race. Sparta, where women were treated much more equally than elsewhere in Greece, produced a famous princess, Caniska. Raised on sports, hunting and horse breeding, Caniska trained and entered a chariot team in the Olympics, where she won twice. Unfortunately for Caniska though, even though she won, it's unlikely she ever got to see the victories, because while women were allowed to attend the festival, they weren't allowed in the main stadium to watch the events or prove that women could be excellent too.
Welcome back. I believe you enjoyed this lesson. If there is need for you to review it for proper understanding before proceeding to the quiz section, endeavor to do so. If you have any question, you can bring it to class or leave it in the comment box below. Have a nice day.